Welcome back to Stonehard Sports. On this episode, we have a very in-depth two-round mock draft for you. This is going to be a mock of what I would do. The past few mocks, I think it's been a little forgotten or misconstrued. That's kind of just been what we think the teams are going to do based on reports and obviously fit. This is just what I would do, and it relatively fits also with some of the picks I had made in terms of like, hey, maybe what this team would do last mocks, but this one's definitely very, very different. You'll see that for sure. I have a long page of notes. I went through this very in-depth, so I promise you I did my due diligence going through every single team and every single pick. Now, just some notes before we get started. I first want to say thank you for all of the just attention that we've gotten recently. This is the first time on YouTube, and we've been obviously hitting, for me personally, I know it's nothing crazy, like the views aren't really that great, but for me personally, I think it's been really cool having like hundreds of people watch your stuff. I really appreciate that, and the likes and the comments. I love the engagement. Super excited for all that stuff. So again, you can watch the whole mock obviously, but leave comments down and tell me what you think, or what you think this team would do or what you would do, and in a cordially manner obviously. And I love going through all the comments and seeing everyone, so thanks for the support. And then again, previously have been what I think the teams will do. This is what I would do. So it's partly related to my also just evaluation of these players, which in the future I'll put up some sort of episode of maybe going over some of my favorite players in this class that aren't, hey, these are just the top guys. I'm going to list all the top ones. Like, yeah, some of those are very good and I love them, but there's some guys lower that I think could be a little bit higher in the class as well. Just some things to remember. I know everyone, really wants their favorite team to go in here and like dominate the mock and win. Unfortunately, obviously that's not going to happen. Every single person's favorite team isn't going to trade up and down, steal players off the board. That's every single draft. That's just not how it works. So I encourage you to be a little bit realistic with what your team might end up getting. But mocks are fun. They're supposed to be fun. So enjoy it. It's not anything crazy. Just have fun, enjoy it. And I love doing mocks, and, just be sure to listen to my reasoning if you have a question about the pick, because I'll be sure to have one for you. So again, if you enjoy the video, like, subscribe, go ahead, share. I appreciate all that stuff. And let's not waste any more time. Let's get started. With the first overall pick to start off this mock, we are going to go quarterback, obviously. We're going to go with Spencer No, I'm just kidding. That was honestly the first overall pick, last year, probably 2 years ago, that some people were rumoring, oh, this might be the first overall pick, with Sam Howell being second. Sam Howell, actually, I do like. He's not really that bad, but no, it's going to be Caleb Williams. It is the correct pick. The Bears traded Justin Fields as they should have, and they go ahead and draft Caleb Williams. He is the most talented quarterback in the class. Yes, he's a little bit erratic with some of his, crazy throws or decision making, but I think a good amount of that had to do with what was around him at USC this previous year. It was not amazing. So just the talent is too much to pass up in Chicago. Easy pick. You get your future quarterback, and I think this would be a very interesting just time period for them, because these past 2 years maybe could be the changing point for Chicago football. I think Caleb just being drafted there, I do think he'll end up being the best quarterback they ever had. Now, will he win a Super Bowl? Obviously, we don't know, and I don't want to predict anything just randomly as a rookie, but I would relatively confidently say Caleb will be the best quarterback they've ever had in their franchise history. That's for sure. And then we're going to go to number 2 for Washington. Now, rumors have been that it is probably potentially Jayden Daniels, but I prefer Drake May as a prospect. I do. It's not by a gigantic margin, but I do definitely prefer him. Jayden is a very good prospect. He obviously, which, I mean, whatever. We'll get into Jayden after the pick. Let's talk about Drake May right now. Drake May, I think, is one of the most slept-on prospects in this class, because he's not being viewed as the second best quarterback in the class. He has the perfect ideal build for a quarterback. He makes a ton of throws that a lot of other quarterbacks just can't make. And even though, he didn't have the greatest year last year, analytically and just based off grades, he was still in the top 10, and his supporting cast was by far the worst out of anyone that was even close to the top 10, like the Bo Nixes, Jaden Daniels, and Michael Penixes of the world. I think Drake Maye, in terms of his size, he just feels like Herbert. He's not a super vocal leader, but he's very well spoken. Great guy. I think just feels like Justin Herbert so much. And I think a lot of people would take Justin Herbert as their starting quarterback. And I'm not, saying, hey, don't take Jaden Daniels. I'm just saying I do think Drake Maye is definitely a better prospect than Jaden Daniels. Just like solidly. Not a ton. Just solidly. He has more, production to go off of. He's much younger. He's had multiple years of like being obviously phenomenal. He did so much with so little. I definitely prefer Maye solidly over Daniels, and something I'm going to be doing. You might hear it a few times in this video. The Stones seal of approval. This is my seal of approval for, I think, this quarterback and this player. If I ever say that, I think it's guaranteed to work. I just think they're guaranteed studs, and I think that is the case for Drake Maye. And then number 3, there's been rumors of J.J. McCarthy or them trading back. I would not do any of that. I do think Jaden Daniels, I know it says 21 PFF, I think is also a little bit too low on him, but I definitely think he is worth taking at the 3rd spot. Now, the stuff I was going to get into, and it's hard to nitpick with these quarterbacks. It really sucks because you kind of have to do it because you got to find some sort of separating point, And while Drake, his kind of separating point was he did have some just kind of poor decisions last year. That wasn't the case the year before because he had actual relative weapons, and they weren't the greatest things in the world, but last year he didn't have a ton at all. Jaden, I think when you nitpick, if you just watch, and obviously he had the best statistical season, won the Heisman, totally deserved. He did have 2 receivers that'll be drafted in the 1st round this year. So that's definitely going to help a ton, and this is his only year of production like this. He's an older prospect. And the thing is, he's very tall, and I think he's a great dual threat, which is super valuable. But he's very slender, and I think he's taken a lot of hits that you kind of are a little bit scared about when you get into the NFL level. So I think if he can learn to just chill a bit and have controlled running, he could be phenomenal. Definitely worth, I think, the 3rd overall pick. I think they're a little bit too low on him again, PFF. But when you separate stuff, I think with age, size, slightly style of play, I would prefer Drake, but Jaden's definitely worth a 3rd overall pick, and you're not upset if you have Jaden Daniels 3rd overall. You're very happy. Then we're going to go to the Cardinals at number 4. Now, for Arizona, there's been talks about maybe trading back. I just don't think I would do that here. I just think you get the best quarterback that is on the board right now. And that is, or not the best quarterback, you get the best wide receiver that is on the board right now. And that is Marvin Harrison, because he's just a guaranteed stud. He's going to be a Stones seal, obviously, because he's not going to fail. He's going to be a stud. There might be a receiver who might have higher potential, but I think at this moment for the Cardinals, I just think this fits perfectly. Don't waste the chance of getting a guaranteed stud wide receiver. He can pretty much do it all. He's not the fastest guy in the world, not the greatest athlete, but he's very, very good. Very good hands. Even though he's dropped a tiny bit, he's gotten so many targets, so it's hard to say. Made so many phenomenal catches, great route runner. Pretty much do it all. Just going to be their next Larry Fitzgerald. It'd be kind of crazy if Marvin Harrison's career plays out as we hope it would. The Cardinals might have 2 of the greatest wide receivers in NFL history, in terms of looking at maybe top 15, top 20 receivers ever. Cardinals might have 2 of them with Larry Fitz. So I think this is just, I would not trade back. I could see how they could, but I would just stay here. Now, this is probably the only pick next where I might do something that I wouldn't 100% do. I would definitely think about it, and I haven't gotten into it, in depth a ton. I would definitely think about it, but I want to do it here because I think it's going to happen. And that is going to be the Vikings trading up with the Los Angeles Chargers. Again, the trade would probably be something like 11 and 23, and you probably have to give up maybe, it doesn't say it here because I can't do 2026 picks, but maybe a 2026 second, or if you give up a first next year, you get like a second and a fourth or a third next year. But for this sake, we'll just stick to this 11 and 23 for 5. It says 38% chance, but I think the Vikings would definitely do that in real life. They probably will have to give up some sort of future pick down here, but I do think the Vikings obviously trading up for J.J. McCarthy, it just seems like it'll happen, and I wouldn't necessarily be too upset at it because it is after these 3. If it's before any of these 3, I'm like, no. But if it's after, I think it's okay. And I think you have to do it because you have to get ahead of maybe teams that would trade up, along with getting ahead of maybe the Giants because they might take a quarterback. So this is the spot, I think, for them to trade back, because the willing team to go back is the Chargers, which I think they'd be definitely willing to do, because I think they just want to build out their roster. It's obviously a new coaching staff. I think Harbaugh would take the chance to get even more Michigan players in his building, getting more picks. I think he'd love that. And I think for the Vikings, you get J.J. McCarthy, who is a very polarizing prospect. My opinion of him is I do think he's the 4th best quarterback in the class, because I think he's basically a quarterback that you can almost do whatever you want with. And it's like, he's taller. He's almost like a Jaden Daniels build. So a little bit, not as heavy as you would like, but still very athletic, very pretty good arm, can make a lot of throws. But the best thing is that he's been in an NFL style offense. So he has experience with a lot of the NFL style, copes that come with being a quarterback. And I honestly think that this is probably the best situation for JJ to go to, is Minnesota, because Minnesota might be the best situation for a future quarterback coming in this year in general. I mean, you get Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. You have Hawkinson. You have Darisaw and O'Neal on the O-line. I know the running back is like kind of rotational, but Aaron Jones is great. Your coach is one of the better offensive-minded young head coaches in the NFL. Defense, they spent a lot of money on, and you have Brian Flores. Obviously, that doesn't relate to the quarterback, but defense definitely helps the team in general and helps the quarterback in terms of maybe getting better field position. I wouldn't start him week 1 or maybe the first entire half of the year. I think Sam, just throw him out there, see what he can do. But I think if he waits a little bit, he's going into a pretty dang good situation. And I think people who hate JJ, if he goes to the Vikings at any pick, I think it's going to look bad for the people who don't like him, because I think this is pretty much the perfect scenario he'd go to. If he went to like the Patriots or Washington, I wouldn't like it. I just wouldn't. The Giants would be okay, but I also wouldn't love it. I just think this is the best situation for him, and I think it would really work out. So number 6, the New York Giants. I have a little bit gone back and forth on this one, and weirdly enough, I'm going to slightly go away from kind of the general pick, and that is I'm going to take Rome Odunze instead of Malik Neighbors. I think Rome just slightly is my quarterback number 2, or my receiver number 2. I keep saying quarterback instead of receiver. He's my receiver number 2. And I think for the Giants, a team that, obviously just comparing Neighbors to Rome, I think the difference is Rome is safer than Neighbors. And that's weird of saying like Neighbors is going to be bust. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying if you're the Giants and you literally do not have some sort of like Alpha X receiver, they just don't have one. Rome is that. He's not perfect, but he's really close. Like, he's pretty close. He could obviously be, I think Neighbors is a better athlete. He's just a little bit better athlete and has more speed, but Odunze, he's not just a go up and get it guy. He's like a move a ton around, but like can also just be just your pure wide receiver 1, like super reliable, complete stud. And if you're the Giants, I think you have a lot of receivers like Wan'Dale Robinson. he's pretty good. You drafted him in the second round 2 years ago. He's pretty good. He'd kind of just not really be getting a role because with Neighbors, I think he is better compared to Odunze in like his specific role, which is being in the slot, but he has to be in the slot. That's kind of the thing. Like him being on the outside, he could still totally do, but there were a few games where he was getting kind of locked up by other SEC corners that are coming in as rookies this year. So if you're doing that, obviously it would take a good amount to get used to. Against NFL type corners, I think it would take a little bit of adjusting, and if he even adjusts at all. But in the slot, he's insane. So I think if you're the Giants, the reason I'm justifying this is you already have like 2 slot receivers that I think you want to use in your offense. You don't just want to throw them away. Just take the guy that I think would fit a little bit more seamlessly in than Neighbors. And I think if you're a team that doesn't have like a pure like phenomenal quarterback, it's better to take Odunze because I think he makes up for some errors that quarterbacks make in terms of just errant throws with his catch radius as compared to Neighbors. So it's just fit, basically. And I know they prefer Neighbors, but I think Odunze might be a little bit of a better fit. So that's why we're going Odunze with the 6th pick. Then at number 7, pretty easy. It's Joe Alt. I know Titans fans are like, we've seen the same pick all the time. Well, it's because it is. I know it's a boring pick, but, you know, this is pretty much the last part of your roster that you really need to fix. He's your super safe left tackle. I didn't do Stone Seal. I always forget to do that. Yes, Alt and Odunze, both of them, because I just think they're pretty very, very safe prospects. And now the Titans teams look pretty interesting. I mean, your O-line, the reason you take Alt, I know you took Peter Skronsky last year, but he's playing at guard right now. Dylan Radens is probably going to play right tackle, so Alt can play left tackle. But you spent a good amount of money on offense and defense, got a lot of different players. This Titans team's not really trying to tank, and I think they're going to be a pretty interesting, not contender maybe to win the division, but to make the playoffs within that very tough division, because it's going to be pretty tough next year. The Texans, Giants, Colts, or not Giants, the Texans, Jaguars, Colts, and Titans. Just thinking about those teams, that's going to be a pretty interesting division, and that's kind of crazy how that changed very quickly, because not too long ago it was one of the worst divisions in football. Now it's might sneakily be the best with Alt going to the Titans there, because they have a very complete roster now. They just need to get the quarterback, which I think Will Levis, could be that. You just got to see, hey, we got these pieces for you. Let's see what you are, Levis. And I think he could definitely be a starter for them. Then we have the Atlanta Falcons at 8. And they have a lot of different ways they could go. I would prioritize edge rusher, but I think with 3 edge rushers being on the board that are worthy at this pick, I think you trade down. And I think there's a team that saw, obviously, a wide receiver go down, which Odunze definitely, even if this was Neighbors, I still think the team, if Odunze was here, would do this. And that is similar to what I had the Cardinals doing, and that's trading back up to go get this player because he would not last, probably, beyond the next 2 teams, and the Falcons would consider taking him as well. So it is going to be the Chargers. They're going to end up trading up. They are probably going to have to give up 11 and 69 for, obviously, 8, and maybe they could give up a 6th round pick next year or something. So 69 is a 3rd round pick, obviously. It's an early 3rd, and they would trade up to go get Neighbors. Go ahead and get Malik Neighbors. Now, I also think this might fit a little bit more because, now, I'm not a big fan of this player, but you did take Quentin Johnston last year, and he is an outside receiver. He's not really a slot. So he could play outside, and Neighbors can play out, but he could also just fit perfectly right into your slot, and boom, you already got Herbert and Neighbors. Phenomenal pairing right there. I think I would honestly prefer these 2 to go to these teams. Now, that's probably not going to happen, but again, this is what I would do, so who cares? And I do think it's very justified and realistic. But yeah, so if Neighbors falls, because Odunze could easily go here as well. These are the pairings I think I would prefer. Then we have the Bears at 9, and I think this has probably got to be pass rusher, in my opinion. I think they really want someone alongside Montez Sweat, and I think you can take a chance on the edge rusher that is not the most like just refined rusher right now in the class is very close, but has the highest upside, and that's Dallas Turner. I think with the Bears, who obviously are a bit of a younger team, but they did trade for a few older players, so they still want to win right now. But defensively, I think with Montez Sweat on one side, you can take Dallas Turner, and it's only going to help his development having Sweat on the other side, because they're not going to be able to have a ton of attention to one or the other. And I think he's going to learn from one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. He has the traits. He's just a little bit more raw, but again, they can afford that with Sweat on the other side. And I think this would be a pretty easy pick for Chicago. Then we have the Jets at number 10, and I am not going to go with Brock Bowers. It's very tempting, but I just don't think it would be the right pick. I'm going to go with Talisi Fuanga out of Oregon State. Now, the offensive line, yes, they did just sign Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses. They are, two 33-plus-year-old tackles, and I'm sorry, the offensive line on week 1, I guarantee you, is not going to look the same come just week 6. Like, injuries happen. You need to have a deep offensive line, and Fuanga can step in and play guard and start and then go back out to tackle maybe once, these different players that they just signed for 1 year maybe retire. I just think your biggest issue last year was that Aaron Rodgers didn't play. So what do you think the number one reason, what do you think their number one just most important thing should be to do this year? Make sure that guy plays. How do you do that? By getting guys to protect him. And Fuanga, I think, is a phenomenal tackle. I definitely think he's worth taking at this spot. Again, they have 2 older tackles. O-line depth is huge. And, now with Fuanga playing guard, because he has very insane size, he's super smart. He can play left or right as well. You have Tyron Smith, Elijah Vera Tucker, Joe Tippmann, Fuanga, and then Morgan Moses with John Simpson coming in as a 6th. That's very great O-line if it's healthy. So I think this is the better pick for them. The Falcons at 11, we are going to go with Laiatu Latu here. I think this is a Falcons team that is not really trying to lose right now. And Latu, I think it came out that Dallas Turner is not the first on their board. I still think this would be a smart move no matter who's first on their board. But I think with the Falcons obviously wanting to win right now, they don't really have a lot of pass rushers at all. I think this should definitely be their first overall pick. And he is a little bit of an older prospect. He's not an insane athlete or anything. His measurables aren't anything crazy, but he is just a pure beast. He's just a pure beast. Fuanga and Latu, both stones, seals for sure. I think obviously you could just go look at the numbers. I think they speak for themselves, but the only reason he's not going higher is because of his age, and he had to medically retire. Now, that was 2 years ago, so you could say, hey, he'll be fine, which could be the case, but it also could be like, hey, this could come up at any moment. We don't really know. But I think with him being the best edge, I think right now, and Atlanta, who wants to try and win right now, this pick fits more. Then we have the Broncos at 12. Brock Bowers has been rumored to go here. They could go quarterback here, but I prefer, honestly, them trading down because you really don't have a lot of picks. I mean, just looking at their picks, they have 12 and 76, and that's it in the top 100. So I think they would need to trade down. And there is a player who's slightly falling who definitely is, at least higher than the top 11 players, and is just falling due to needs, obviously. And I think a team should go ahead and trade up for him, and that is the Cincinnati Bengals. I think they should go up and grab Brock Bowers. It'll probably be 18, and they will probably have to give up their second-round pick, but they could, make up for that by them giving up their earliest third-round pick, and we're going to force this trade through. And we're going to have the Cincinnati Bengals go ahead and get Brock Bowers. Bengals, I do think they need to be a little more aggressive in this class. Bowers is not going to fall, and he's not just a tight end. He's a pure weapon. You can move him around anywhere. With the looming issues, with T. Higgins, don't really want to pay maybe a second wide receiver all this money. Brock Bowers, he's not just a tight end. I know you signed Mike Gesicki. Both of them are not really pure tight ends. They can move around a ton. and I think Bowers is a total stud, and him being in this offense, he'd definitely be the second best option. That's for sure. And you could still maybe get a receiver down the board because this receiver class is stacked. I think it's definitely the best group in this draft, and it's one of the best receiver classes ever. That's not really hyperbole. The receiver class, the quarterback class is very good, but tackle is insane, and I think corner is very good too. So I'd say receiver, tackle, and corner are probably the best in the class. Edge rusher and DN have like depth / good guys at the top. And then, interior lineman is also very good. O-line class, receiver, and tight end is kind of where this class really shines, especially early. But go ahead, it's a stone steal. He's definitely going to be the best. Go get him. Just be aggressive. Go up and get this guy. Then we have the Raiders at 13. I'm actually not going to go quarterback. I think if they want one, they could potentially just wait on it. But it's probably, if you take quarterback, I would say Michael Penix, but Bo Nix is obviously still here, so maybe if you want to take him, you can. But I think just wait a little bit. I don't really think there's any teams here that are going to be like, oh, yeah, well, let's go up and get this guy. So let's go ahead and get one of my favorite players in the class. I think he's a guaranteed, just pure stud, and he's probably a steal, honestly, at 13. That's Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo. He has the production. He tested phenomenal, has no issues, was great at the Senior Bowl. What's not to love? What's not to love? He's not by far, but absolutely the best corner in this class. He's, I think, a guaranteed stud. Maybe not the same extent as, Sauce Gardner, but I think he's going to be pretty close to Sauce Gardner. Going to be making Pro Bowls very early in his career. Might push for an All-Pro here and there. I'm very high on Quinyon Mitchell. I think he's a total stud. And I think this would be very good for the Raiders at 13, who I would say corner is probably their number one need alongside linebacker, maybe. Then we have the Saints at 14. It's probably got to be offensive lineman, but I'm going to go in O-line. I don't know if a lot of people have had them pick, and that is going to be Troy Fautanu out of Washington. I do think he's the third best offensive lineman in this class. And obviously, if you're the Saints, they haven't looked like they're trying to tank at all. They re-signed 2 of their older players, Tyrann Mathieu at safety. So they're clearly not trying to lose. They have Derek Carr. They want to be trying to contend for the playoffs. And I think you could get Troy in, and he could start at guard right now. And then if you have any issues with maybe Trevor Penning, you don't want to re-sign him, or Ryan Ramczyk maybe retires, he could just kick to tackle. He's a great athlete, a great pass blocker, and I think definitely a Stone's seal for sure. I would say this would probably be the best pick at 14. Then we have the Colts at 15. This definitely could be what they do. It's not what they typically do because it's not a freak athlete, but I think this would be the smart pick, and that's taking Terrion Arnold out of Alabama. I would say, probably need more outside corner help. They have their slots really figured out, and Juju Brents is kind of the only guy on the outside that they really have. And I think this would be really good. He's an ideal size at corner. He's a good athlete. Not amazing athlete, but still very good. And he is just had amazing production his past year. A lot of guys didn't throw a ton at Kool-Aid, and then they didn't really throw a ton at Arnold after he showed, hey, don't throw at me either. So relatively safe, I would say. Might be a guy that could jump him if he reaches his potential somewhere later on the board, but this is pretty safe for the Colts, who also don't really want to tank. They re-signed a ton of their younger players. They also want to try and win this next past year with their quarterback in his second year, if he can hopefully stay healthy. Then we have the Seahawks at 16, and I'm going to do something I don't know if I've seen anyone do, or a lot of people do. Seattle, they could go in a lot of different directions. They do need interior offensive line, but Troy Fautanu has gone ahead of them, and they could play tackle, but there's a lot of tackles that they could get on the board later. So we're going to have a trade. I think there's a team that should trade up for a player that I do think is worth taking in this spot and has been rising because his medicals are all good, apparently, and I think this team needs to actually be aggressive for once and take advantage of the window they have. And that's the Green Bay Packers. I'm going to have the Green Bay Packers trade up with the Seattle Seahawks, it would be 25 and one of their second-round picks, and they would probably have to maybe get back. They might also have to give up 25, 58, and probably 126. And they would get 16, maybe a 6th next year, but it doesn't really matter. But this is probably the trade that they would end up doing, somewhere around there, if this happened. And I think they should go up and get Cooper DeJean out of Iowa. Just totally fits the Packers in general. Just if you imagine, it'd be like, yep, this guy's a Packers player. But even just aside from that, Cooper's going to be able to come in, and he's literally going to be able to play anything they want. They do need a strong safety. He could play that. If they need an outside corner, a second one, he could also do that as well. He's a very good athlete. Just because he's a white guy doesn't mean he's not a good athlete. He's a stud. And the only reason he's falling is because the medicals, they seem to be good. He's got good size, good athlete. I think it's definitely a Stone's seal. He's going to be good. But I think the Packers should be aggressive. Just go up and get this guy. You got Jordan Love. You have drafted so many great players on your offense. Maybe not potential superstars, but guys who have just been looking like they're going to be pretty good in their career. Jordan Love you have, and he's obviously going to have to get extended, but try and hit on some of these defensive guys, because your window is looking like right now with how Love has been playing, and I think you could be a sneaky team to try and contend or come back to contending in the NFC. Then we have the Jags at 17. There's still a corner that's worth taking here, and that's going to be Nate Wiggins out of Clemson. They definitely do still need cornerback. Could also sneakily be wide receiver as well, but I would definitely prefer corner. It's much more of a need. They lost Darius Williams. Ronald Darby, I believe, is their CB1, which is just not great. Wiggins is a very crazy athlete. He can keep up with anyone. He's a little handsy and had some character concerns, apparently. He's been slightly injured as well. There was a few stuff at the Combine that came out which might make him slide a little bit, but I still think with their need at corner, he's still a corner worth taking in the mid-first round. So Nate Wiggins to the Jaguars. And this is where I'm going to have Bo Nix go to the Broncos. He just totally fits with Sean Payton. I think which the Broncos, they just need to get a quarterback. They literally don't have one in the room right now that's going to be capable of starting. And Bo Nix, I think this is, for this specific class, a perfect fit. He has a ton of experience. I think he's played the most college games literally ever, which is interesting, but yeah, he's super experienced. He's smaller, but a very good athlete for what you would think. He could definitely run. He's obviously, like I said, very experienced. He's more of like a short play action kind of, not really a deep guy passer, but Sean Payton dealt with that forever in New Orleans with Drew Brees. And I don't think Payton wants to come in and have to like train a young quarterback to do all this stuff. Like, this just seems like, hey, get him in there. He's going to know what to do. And I think he might not be the greatest quarterback, obviously, but I think Bo Nix will enter the realm of quarterbacks where it'll be like, yeah, you could win a Super Bowl with this guy. You got to have, obviously, a lot of people around him, but you could definitely get there with him. And I think you just can't go into next year with Jarrett Stidham as your starter. I mean, teams also, we got to realize you got to make money. And if Jarrett Stidham's saying, hey, this guy's going to be our starter next year, you're admitted to tanking, and I don't think Sean Payton wants to tank at all. So go ahead and get Bo Nix. You traded down, so I think this fits a little bit more. Then we have the Rams at 19, and after losing Aaron Donald, I think it's got to be defensive interior. We're going to have the first defensive interior go here, and we are going to make it Byron Murphy out of Texas. I think I'm opting for Murphy over, Newton, but more so Verse. I think you could take at edge, but I'm opting for Murphy just because the potential I think is more with Byron Murphy. He does have maybe some not really concerns, but they would have to try and figure out where to play him. I think they do run a 3-4, so he'd probably just fit right in terms of the defensive interior between the B gap, but he's a stud athlete, had very good production, was only for 1 year in terms of his insane production, but phenomenal athlete, going to come in, and I think he could also move around to 3-4-4-3 depending on what they do with their new defense, because Raheem Morris is not there, so I'm not 100% sure what it's going to be. I think it's kind of a hybrid defense there, but great pass rusher who's capable versus the run, slightly undersized. Have you heard that before? So Rams, Byron Murphy. Then we're going to go with the Steelers here. I know this player is probably not going to go here. It's been rumored in the beginning, but he's probably going to fall. I think it's still worth taking. Just get Jackson Powers Johnson at 20. He's going to be good. He's a Stones seal for sure. Just don't take the risk. Don't take the risk. Just get the best interior offensive lineman potentially in this class. He's just a pure stud. They don't really have any centers on the roster at all. He's very good versus the pass and run. He's a little bit older, but they don't really need to develop some sort of younger guy. Their offensive line has been a little bit shaky, so just get a good stalwart in the middle. I don't think they should mess around and be like, oh, maybe we could get someone else. Like maybe another team might say, nah, we'll just get this guy. Maybe Tampa or Seattle down here also just says the same thing. Or the Eagles. Maybe they're also like, hey, no, we want this guy in our team. So just stay here. I think taking him at 20 would be very good. Then we have the Dolphins at 21. They're going to go one of the tackles here. They fell a tiny bit. I still think this is relatively where they could go. But again, players are going to fall. Sometimes it's based on needs. Sometimes just what other teams think. Like Bo Nix is a need here. Nate Wiggins, all these corners went on a run. So it's just based off need. But I do think tackle would probably be a smart pick for them. And we're going to go Olu Fashanu out of Penn State. Yes, that is how you pronounce it. He's probably going to be not as good on the interior, so you do have to take him at tackle, which I know their interior is not as good, but Armstead is very old, and he's probably going to miss a few games anyways. So, and Olu's not as polished. He's a little bit less experienced, so I think it would do and bode well for him to not just try and rush and start out there immediately. He has a ton of potential. He's a great pass blocker. Not as consistent versus the run, but I think a Miami team that obviously loves passing and just going down the field and being quick anyways, get one of the most athletic tackles in the class. So that's going to be what I'm going to have the Dolphins do. Then at 22 with the Eagles, I'm going to go interior offensive line. I know it doesn't say, but they do love filling out their interior offensive line. And if I'm the GM or part GM or whatever, and I'm looking at my team and my coach and what they prefer to do and everything, Eagles want their offensive line like completely filled all the time. And they do have a little hole at guard / center. They might move a few guys around, but there's like a spot in the interior that they could still draft. And I think Graham Barton would fit that pretty perfectly. He's probably going to play guard or center. He's a stud athlete, does a very good job of getting low in his stance, which, does that sound familiar at all? Maybe an offensive line having to get really low and undercut blocks, or, try and undercut with a block on the defensive guy. That's what the literal tush push is. So I think this is a pretty perfect fit, to be honest. If he goes down here, I would not be surprised if this ended up happening in real life. Graham Barton from Duke to the Eagles. Then we're going to have the Chargers. They get their second first-round pick here at 23. And it's going to go a player that is slightly fallen, but I think could be around where he goes as well. That's Jerzon Newton. Their defensive interior does not look amazing. LA does also need like a cornerback, but I think defensive interior with Newton here is probably a better pick. He's arguably the best defensive lineman in this class. I slightly prefer Byron Murphy, but he's also like your ideal pass rusher who's still very good versus the run. He's just not as good of a pass rusher as Byron Murphy is. He is dealing also with an injury, so that's why he's falling a little bit. So we didn't really get any athletic numbers for him, but on tape he does look like a very good athlete, just probably not as good as Byron Murphy. And he's definitely worth a first-round pick. And I think LA would kind of love that he fell down here. And you definitely want to build through the trenches. You've got a receiver early because you need receiver. But start off, you could say, your real draft with getting down and dirty and getting Jerzon Newton out of Illinois. I think that'd be a great pick for them. The Cowboys at 24. I do think this is tackle. And I think I'm going to go with arguably, I think Troy Fautanu is like a guard. I don't view him as a tackle. He could be a tackle, so he's kind of in there. If you're just basing pure tackles, Amarius Mims, I think, is the third best tackle in this class, and I think is probably worthy of being taken higher here than this spot. Again, it's because of needs and a lot of stuff that falls, and that happens all the time in the draft. The draft is not, all right, who's the first, who's the second, who's the third best player? That's not how that works at all. But Amarius Mims out of Georgia is a stud. I think he arguably has the most potential at tackle in the class. He did have limited snaps, but was just very good when he played. He's super young. His measurables are insane. I believe he's 6'7", 340 pounds, which is insane. And if there's one thing that the Cowboys know how to do, it's develop offensive line, and they can move Tyler Smith to guard. Mims could go in at tackle, and I think one off season with the Cowboys, and he'll be a stud. So this would be pretty perfect for them. Then we have the Seahawks as they traded back down to 25. Now, I'm going to have them take not an interior offensive lineman or offensive lineman, but an edge rusher, because I do think they could use edge rusher as well, and I think the value is too good to pass up with Jared Verse still being on the board. So that's who we're going to go with. Again, they could go interior offensive line, but a lot of the main like first-round caliber guys did go earlier, and I had written this down before this even happened, but I do think they could go out and sign an interior offensive lineman like Dalton Reisner, Greg Van Roten, and those guys. And I think they literally ended up signing like Lincoln Tomlinson or something like yesterday or whatever, and I had written this beforehand, so that's kind of funny how that worked out. So they did end up signing an interior offensive lineman. They probably still could draft one, but maybe it's not like, oh my God, freak out, we need to go get one in the first round. If Fautanu is there at 16, I think you definitely take him. But he might go a little bit earlier than people think. But Verse, if he falls out of Florida State, I think this would be just kind of too good to pass up. He's a very consistent pass rusher off the edge. They do have Boye Mafe, but that's kind of it in terms of edge rushing pass rushers, and their coach, defensive coordinator, definitely wants to try and build up his pass rushing team with Seattle now, and their defense on the secondary looks pretty good. Linebackers, they could also use as well, but not taking in the first round. But edge rusher, it is a need with him falling. I think this kind of works out. You trade back and get Verse at 25. I like it. Then we have 26 with Tampa. A lot of different things that they could do here. Could go J.C. Latham if they want. If they want corner, maybe. A lot of different stuff. But there's a player who has slightly fallen a little bit, and I think would maybe go around this range. But I think there should be a team, I don't think I've seen this trade too much either, that should trade up to go snag this receiver before the Bills, before maybe the Ravens or something like that, or whatever happens with Ayuk with the Niners, and that's the Chiefs. I think the Kansas City Chiefs should trade up to this spot here if this happens. They would probably have to give up 32 and maybe like a third-round pick, 95, for like 26. Maybe they also give up 159, which I think is like a fourth or early fifth. And they go ahead and trade up and get one of the, I think the top tier in terms of the second tier of the top three, I think the best in that tier, and that's Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. Obviously, the stuff with Rashee Rice makes it even worse, so I think you definitely should go ahead and try and get a potential wide receiver that, getting ahead of Buffalo if he's still there, or maybe even if the Cardinals want to take another receiver. He's a stud. He's an ideal vertical wide receiver. He's 6'4". He has great footwork, very good release, and speed. He's pretty fast as well. He's kind of like a lower tier. He's kind of like a lower tier vertical wide receiver one. So not like insane wide receiver one, but I do think he's a lower tier wide receiver one potential. But with Patrick Mahomes, he's probably going to develop a little bit quicker, and he probably would be valued even quicker. This is definitely a vertical offense in general, and I think this would fit really well. And I like this for both the Chiefs and Tampa, who could get more picks, because you see their needs. They low-key have a lot of different needs that they could have. So if they want to even get close to the playoffs that they had last year. But Kansas City, I do like them being aggressive and getting a wide receiver at 26. Then at 27, Seems like an easy pick. I think we'll just go J.C. Latham here. They could use any sort of talent on the offensive line with Latham falling. I'm not as high on J.C. as other kind of the consensus. He's still definitely a first-round player, and I think you just take him because you need any offensive line help. And he's good in zone blocking. He does have fast feet and hands, but he wasn't really elite at anything in college and had kind of a rough game versus a lot of NFL players in Michigan. So that is a little bit of a concern. And if you're not really great at a ton of stuff, like what are you going to be good at in the NFL? So I think his ceiling is higher, obviously, if he could learn and do a lot of stuff, but he also kind of has a pretty low floor. Like, I wouldn't be surprised Mims could obviously be a bust if he doesn't go to the correct team, but I wouldn't be surprised if Latham maybe comes out of this class as the biggest boomer bust tackle in the first round, at least, just for the first round. Then we're going to have the Buffalo Bills at 28. This one, I think, is an easy pick. Low-key consensus, or probably just mostly consensus. And that is going to be Adonai Mitchell out of Texas. He's definitely a more raw wide receiver than I think a lot of people realize. But this definitely has to be the pick here. I think he's worth taking in the first round. Again, this receiver class is great. He's your ideal outside wide receiver. He is inconsistent, definitely was in college. But I do think he has the most potential, honestly, at the position. Like, he could almost even be like a CeeDee Lamb type. It's obviously going to help having Josh Allen throw you the ball, but he's not even really like a 3-down type of player, honestly, because he doesn't block at all. He's kind of just there to receive the ball. So maybe that has some mindset questions. I'm not really sure, but as a receiver, he's definitely a stud, and I think it would help being in Buffalo, and we'll see if he can take over the Stephon Diggs role for the Bills. 29, the Lions. This is also, I think, an easy pick. You can afford to just take the best player on the board, which I do think is Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama. They probably still need some cornerback help. He's good in coverage, good in zone. He isn't super aggressive or anything. His speed is a little bit of a concern. Might not be super fast, or I think he's just barely fast enough. But he's very solid. He's a high floor corner for a team that wants to win right now. I think this works. Then we have the Ravens. And with the Ravens, I'm going to end up going Ladd McConkey here. I think Ladd McConkey is a first-round caliber wide receiver. I think he is. I might have him even a little bit higher than Adonai Mitchell, but I think Adonai Mitchell fits more with the Bills in terms of kind of the receiver they want. For the Ravens, I think this fits because this is just going to be a consistent guy that's going to get open and catch the ball. Like, he is one of the best route runners just in terms of prospects that have come out of the draft. And in the NFL, he'll be one of the better route runners in the NFL immediately. Just immediately. He's super reliable, phenomenal route runner, great hands. I think they only really have 2 real wide receivers on the roster right now with Rashad Bateman, and I don't know what the heck is up with Zay Flowers. I don't know what's going on with that situation, but if he's fine and gets in the field, I think give Zay Flowers, who's more of a vertical, smaller guy, Bateman, who's kind of a bigger go-up-and-get-it guy, and then McConkey, who can play in the slot and do a lot of the shorter/medium route stuff and be super reliable. I know you have Mark Andrews as well. Obviously, he's tight end, but he was injured last year. So I think I honestly love this pick if the Ravens can do it. Go ahead and get Ladd McConkey. The San Francisco 49ers, I'm going to have them go Tyler Guyton here. I'm not as high in Tyler Guyton as other players or just other people, but I do think it just kind of fits with what they should do. He's a former defensive end, so he hasn't really played tackle a ton, but he's definitely a monster athlete at tackle. He's played mostly right tackle, but he can move to the left side, and I think a team that, does have older tackles on their roster, like Trent Williams, I think like Colton McKivitz is their other tackle, don't really want that, so a team, you could have him come in, develop, and he could potentially be a long-term starting tackle at 31. Then at 32, with the Buccaneers after the trade down, I think the biggest need right now for them would probably be edge rusher. And I'm going to go with an edge rusher that I think could sneak into the first round, and that's Chop Robinson. out of Penn State. He is really raw. More raw than a lot of people think. I know you'll look at PFF and his grades were like phenomenal, which, some of them are relatively true, but that run defense grade should be down here if it's going to be for the NFL, because he is not a good run defender. He's just not. He's the pure pass rusher, and he's pretty raw. He doesn't really know a ton of moves. He kind of just wins based off his athleticism, but he's an insane athlete, like insane. So I think if he's probably the biggest boom or bust receiver not receiver. Why do I keep saying receiver? I keep saying all these different positions. He's the biggest boom or bust edge rusher in this entire class, I think. Even more so than any player above or below him. And I think with Tampa, your team, at least in my opinion, it's kind of just, it's not mid, but there's definitely good players, but I don't really see like a ton of super high upside. With them losing Shaq Barrett, if you can hit on Chop Robinson, that raises your ceiling a ton if you have one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, and you get him down here at 32. So I think it's worth taking the risk, and it's not as big of a risk because you did trade back, and it's the last pick in the first round, so you have the fifth-year option. So I think this works well for them as well. This is kind of I do like a ton of the trades that I made in the first round. I think a lot of them work pretty well for both sides. Now we're going to go to the second round. Yes, I went in depth on all of the second round picks as well, I promise. So starting with the second round, Carolina Panthers, I think they should go with the next best corner, and that is Mike Sainristil out of Michigan. I do think he's probably a second round pick, but I would say he's worth like the first pick in the second round because I think Carolina should focus on corner earlier. They did sign Clowney, obviously, when they got rid of Burns. They traded for Deontay Johnson. Receiver is still a need, but I think cornerback you should probably get because J.C. Horn is kind of injury-prone a little bit, and you did trade Dante Jackson. Now, they did sign a few other guys like Dane Jackson, but in terms of the slot, Troy Hill is currently your slot, and he's really old. And Mike Sainristil is probably the best slot corner in this class if you're maybe saying that Cooper DeJean is like a hybrid slot safety outside. I think Mike is just the best pure slot in the class. His production last year was insane, had like 6 picks, very good in zone and man. Not as much of a run defender, but just I think would be very good, who could also play on the outside, move to the slot mostly. Go ahead and get a corner. You can get any of the guys, Kamari Lassiter, TJ Tampa. I think any of those guys would work, but I would go Mike. If I'm Carolina. Then we have at 34, the New England Patriots, and I think they should trade down. Again, I would say they have a good amount of needs, and I think there's a player still on the board that could have gone in the first round that a team should trade up for, and that is going to be obviously the Las Vegas Raiders. They have 44, so I think they're going to move 10 spots up and get into the 34th pick from the 44th pick, and they probably would have to give up a third round pick next year maybe, and like maybe 148, but they could get like 180 back, so they end up moving down from 148 to 180, but this is the trade I think that goes on something close to that, and they go ahead and take Michael Penix out of Washington. I think this is probably the perfect spot for him, like a Will Levis type in terms of falling to the second round. He's worth a first-round pick. I could see a team taking him late first round, key in late. But I think at 34, this would be pretty perfect for the Raiders, who can go ahead and still get Quinion Mitchell with their pick at 13. Penix is probably already better than any quarterback in that room right now, to be honest. He's got a great arm, and just his deep ball is phenomenal. He can throw off his back foot and get the ball like 50-plus yards down the field. He's got a great arm, and he's pretty good at least back off-balance throws that are deep especially, but he's older. He has injury problems because he's been injured, like not this past year, but like 3 years or 4 years after that. He has a ton of NFL players around him while at Washington, like multiple receivers, like 3 receivers that'll be drafted, that relatively high, 2 tackles, at least offensive linemen that'll be drafted. So the team around him on offense was very good, and he can't really I mean, it's not that he can't, but he has issues throwing to the middle of the field. He like avoids it, which is definitely a problem. So, I think you could either play around that or that could be solved, but I still think he's worth taking here at this pick. And if you're, the Raiders, the quarterback situation is not really exciting, I think Penix would bring some excitement to that quarterback room, and I think they'd be happy getting him at 34 rather than 13. Then we have the Cardinals at 35. We're going to go ahead and go TJ Tampa. I think you could also give him to Carolina here as well, but I slightly prefer Mike over TJ. But TJ's still very good. Quarterback room does look rough for the Cardinals. I think Sean Murphy-Bunting is kind of there. There's not really much else outside of that. And they already really have a safety duo, so I'd rather go a pure outside corner, and that is TJ Tampa. He does have long arms. His footwork is kind of iffy, and he doesn't have the best speed in the world, but his change of direction is great. He's got good size. He's balanced in man and zone. He's one of the weirder cornerbacks in this class. I could definitely see him being a late first-round pick as well, but I think Arizona, who cares? Just go ahead, take chances, go get these potential good players, and you definitely need cornerback help. So TJ Tampa to the Cardinals. Then we have Washington at 36. In terms of their offensive line, I would go the best offensive lineman, I think, on the board, and that is Jordan Morgan out of Arizona. I think he could even go here if the Chiefs stay here, but in this mock, they trade up, and even in real life, I think they would take a receiver here anyways, because that Rashee Rice thing is just so bad. It's very, very bad situation. If you don't know, go look it up. I warn you, obviously, but just young players potentially throwing their career away. I don't know what the thing will be, but they said, they're forcing him to turn himself in, which he did turn himself in yesterday. So we'll see what's up with that, but just sucks. Just very, very bad. But back to the Commanders, Jordan Morgan at tackle. I think they need to get someone who can kind of just step in and play. I don't think you should take too many chances with the O-line with a new quarterback coming in. I think you just need to get the best tackle at this moment. Right now, the most experienced. Don't really take too many chances. You have a young quarterback, so just get some sort of solid, stable offensive line in there. Jordan's probably going to start at left tackle right away, and he's consistent. He's got a high floor. He's consistent. He's experienced. Washington made a ton of moves, and I don't think they really want to lose at all, and they do need help at one of their tackle spots, so I think this is a pretty good pick for them. Then we have the Chargers at 37. I don't really care if I've never seen this. I'm going to go do it because I think he's just the best. I think he is probably the only first-round caliber wide receiver. I keep saying wide receiver on all these things. He's the best first-round caliber player that is still on the board, and that's Peyton Wilson out of NC State. This dude is insane. This dude's insane. He might go a little bit later. He might go earlier. I don't know. I've seen so much stuff, but he's better than the 37th player in the class. I'll tell you that. As someone who watched him every single game at NC State, he is a monster. He's just amazing. He's got great size, great athleticism. He had the best year of any linebacker last year, and one of the better ones, honestly, just in college football history, if you really look into the numbers and just how many awards he was able to get. He's a consistent tackler. He's good in coverage. He was first in coverage stops. He was pretty much the biggest lead for NC State's defense last year, and the only thing that's holding him back is his age and his injury history, as this is like his first year of playing full football. But if you see what he's capable of, I think it's definitely worth taking the chance, especially in the second round. And for a Chargers team that has really Denzel Perryman as their only linebacker with any starting experience, I think a lot of teams are going to fall in love with Peyton, and I think Jim's just going to be like, he could wait, obviously, and maybe get his Michigan guy, Junior Colson, at linebacker. But, again, this is what I would do, and if I have any sort of linebacker need, just get this guy. Just get him on your team. He's going to be insane. Then we have the Tennessee Titans here at 38. And I'm going to end up going with Darius Robinson out of Missouri. He was slightly rumored to be a first-round pick. I think that's probably a little too much, but I do like this spot for him at 38 with the Titans specifically. I don't really see too many edge rushers on their roster right now. It's kind of only Harold Landry and Arden Key, and I think Arden Key is more of a rotational pass rusher. Darius Robinson is a huge edge. He can be on the inside, and there are 3-4, or he can move outside and play linebacker, so he's versatile in that way. He has great measurables, arm size, hand length. He's just not super speedy. He's like a pure power guy, and he's only played edge for 1 year, so that's the slight downsides, but he did have pretty good production for Missouri, who had a great year last year, so let's go ahead and get him there. Then the Panthers at 39. I do think this is wide receiver, and I went back and forth on this for a lot of different players because the receiver class is just so deep and very good, but I think they should just get probably the best, just safest hands, best weapon I think that's on the board right now, and that's Ricky Pearsall, in my opinion. I do think Ricky Pearsall is near the top tier in terms of just the kind of gap below. I think you have the 3 receivers, obviously, that went up here in the early first. And I think you have 3 with, like, Ladd, Adonai, and Brian Thomas. And I think there's a slight gap there. But I think Ricky is in contention to be kind of the top of that tier as well. He projects as a very good slot receiver in the NFL who can still play outside as well. So he's very versatile in that way. I think for Carolina, who has Adam Thielen, who's getting old, he could play there, and Ricky could play outside, and then he could move inside after that. He has great feet and very reliable hands. He's a great route runner, very good athlete. I think he would be the best wide receiver, the best route running wide receiver in that room when he comes in. And I just think he's being a little bit slept on. And I think if Panthers fans got him, I don't know how they would feel in the beginning. As a Panthers fan, I would love it, obviously. But I think when they see him on the field, they would just be like, oh, yeah, we love this guy. This guy's a stud. Just to get good players around Bryce Young. Just do it, and it'll all work out. I promise you, and I think they're slowly starting to do that. They could also maybe trade down. I've heard of them maybe having rumors of trading down. I'd be fine with that, but just get a corner, whether it's Mike or someone else, whoever they prefer. There's a few guys I like a little more than others, and I think you could also get maybe some other kind of receivers, but I think Ricky fits their team right now, and I think this would be a great pick for them. Then we have Washington again at 40, and we're going to end up going Troy Franklin. Out of Oregon, they receiver, kind of looks like it needs help outside of Terry, obviously, because you just got to really hope Jahan Dotson kind of takes another step that he really didn't last year. And after that, it's kind of Diami Brown, but he's, I think, like a 4th receiver. And then you have, like, Olamide Zaccheaus. Not really someone you want starting at all. So I think Troy will be a nice complementary piece to Terry McLaurin. He's kind of like your young outside wide receiver too. Nothing really catches your eye. He's got slightly questionable hands, but he really finds open space well. I'm not as high on Troy as other people, so maybe he goes higher or lower, but I think for a Washington team that can move Jahan Dotson to the slot and have Troy Franklin on the outside, I think that just fits really well. So we'll have Troy go at 40 to Washington. 41, the Green Bay Packers are here. They had obviously traded up before, but in terms of looking at the board, I think they could afford to trade down and kind of recoup some of their picks, and we're going to have a different team trade up, and that is going to be the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm going to have the Eagles trade up in this case in the second round. They're going to give up 50 and probably a 3rd round pick next year, and they're obviously going to get 41, and we'll give them, like, they end up moving backwards in like the 5th round or 6th round or something like that. And it says not accepted. Watch if I like take this away, they'll like accept it right here. Yeah, really weird. I don't know, it's kind of dumb. But Eagles here at 41. I'm gonna have them end up trading up for Kamari Lassiter out of Georgia. This is probably one of the more polarizing players in the class. I'd say it's one of the, not a last-minute trade, but one of the trades I was like, yeah, let's just go ahead and do it. Because it was kind of weird to place him in a spot, but I think he fits perfectly with the Eagles, especially if they don't take some sort of cornerback or secondary piece in the 1st round. He can move around to a lot of different places at corner. He has very good agility. He's very fluid. He doesn't really put himself in any sort of bad position, which is pretty good. But he doesn't have the greatest speed, And I think he could also be a very good like swing safety, kind of swapping maybe duties with C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who they just signed, in terms of maybe being in the slot, being, maybe back at safety. And I think, obviously CJ, who was hurt all year, but in terms of their defensive schemes, I think with Vic Fangio, Kamari Lassiter going to a scheme like this is probably one of the best things for him. And I think he is definitely worthy of being at this spot. I think I'm very high on Lassiter. I think he just has good tape, so just take the guy with good tape. I know he doesn't have the best measurables, but I think he's just going to be good. And I think he would be able to be best utilized with the Eagles. And I think if we're thinking that, they should also be thinking that. And I don't think he would last because the cornerbacks are slowly going to start going, because the receivers and the corners, people are going to realize they're very good and they might start going off a little earlier. So we'll have the Eagles trade up and the Packers trade down, trying to get some of their pits back. And they go ahead and get Kamari Lassiter. Then we have the Texans at 41. And we are going to have them go with a linebacker. I do think they still need to get some sort of linebacker in the building. And we're going to go with Edgerrin Cooper out of Texas A&M. Houston, they did spend some money for Azeez Al-Shaair, but he's kind of like a Mike linebacker. They really need more of like an aggressive weak side linebacker who can kind of like stuff the run and hit halfbacks at the line of scrimmage. And that's literally Edgerrin Cooper to a T. Like, he's a great athlete, super aggressive, capable in coverage. He's one of, just in terms of him going here, this is probably one of my more favorite just player pairings for a team. Like, they need a Sam linebacker, put him in there, or they need a Will linebacker, weak side, put him in there, boom. Just going to work perfectly. So this would be a pretty good spot for him at 42. 43 with the Falcons, they do need a corner. So we're going to go Ennis Rakestraw, one of the last corners in terms of the second tier of cornerbacks, I think, that aren't guaranteed first-round picks, but still very good second-round picks. He's kind of one of the mysteries of this class. Primarily a zone cornerback, and he's a good run defender. Doesn't have amazing speed. He's very smart, so I think Raheem Morris would really appreciate that and kind of like that. But Atlanta does need corner. I don't know why. There were a lot of people in my last video that were like, we don't need corner, blah, blah, blah. Yes, you do. Atlanta needs corner. Right now, I think, obviously, it's A.J. Terrell, and he's not guaranteed to stay for super long. We have no idea. But they also signed Mike Hughes, and he's like a slot, and that's okay. You don't even have to think, oh, what if A.J. Terrell leaves? No, let's just say he stays there his entire career. You have Mike Hughes as a slot right now, and then on the outside you have Clark Phillips, who had kind of a rough year, and he has played a little bit of both. He's moved to slot and to outside, but it's kind of A.J. Terrell. Yeah, you need some starting caliber corners there on the outside, and maybe Clark is better in the slot, so maybe you could just have Ennis Rakestraw be outside and then Clark go onto slot, and I think that'd work pretty well for Atlanta. I think they'd be pretty happy with this class coming out. At 44, we have the Patriots finally be able to pick, and I'm going to have them go receiver. I don't know how people would feel about this one. I kind of like it because this receiver is one of the more polarizing receivers as well, because some people have him like close to the lower top 10, and some people have him like the lower teens. I'm going to put him like right in the middle right here, and it is obviously based on like fit and everything. And I'm going to go Keon Coleman to the Patriots. I do still think they need wide receiver help in that building, but even just obviously just their weapons. They just need more weapons. Demario Douglas was good in the slot, so I don't think you want to get a slot wide receiver. You want to get an outside wide receiver because that's kind of what they need. And Keon Coleman is that. He's an impressive athlete. He's very physical, good in catching traffic. He can separate. He's not a terrible separator. He did have a very low drop rate as well. Speed, though, was a concern, at least during his 40. But they did this like gauntlet drill where the receivers run and catch from one side and then catch from the other side. And he clocked in at like the fastest time during that drill. So maybe it's just his game speed is just faster than he just was on his 40. And he also, funny enough, almost played basketball at Michigan State. He was a former transfer from Michigan State. So he's a very weird prospect. But I think for a Patriots team who just doesn't really have any sort of stud wideouts, I think it's worth taking the risk a little bit and kind of just extending, they do have a lot of extended depth on the team. Like, they have a lot of, like, mid wide receivers, I do think Demario Douglas is pretty good, but go ahead and get a potential star at wide receiver. This dude has the potential to be phenomenal. So go ahead, go out on a limb, and just get a guy who could potentially end up being a first-round caliber receiver at 44. I think it's a pretty good chance. Or not a pretty good chance that I do think it's a good chance that he's going to be good. I don't know where he'll be in terms of, as a player, but go ahead and take the chance at 44 of him maybe being a first-round caliber or a wide receiver 1 caliber player. 45, the New Orleans Saints, we are going to have them go to the defensive line now. They addressed offensive line. We'll have them go defensive line, and we'll go Braden Fisk. He fits perfectly within their, 4-3. He's a 4-3 defensive tackle. Definitely perfect fit for their need. He is smaller, and his arms are a little bit shorter, but he's an insane athlete. Insane. He actually was a transfer from Western Michigan, so it did take him a little bit to kind of get used to playing in the ACC, but when he did, the last few games, he was very good. So I think this is definitely worth taking for the Saints at 45. The Colts at 46, we're going to kind of fit in. We have, our coach and our GM next to us a little bit. I'm the main GM. We got the assistant GM over here. And Chris Ballard, now obviously them, love their athletes. So we're going to go ahead and get them an athlete. And that is going to be Xavier Worthy out of Texas. Now, obviously, his speed kills, and that's kind of the main thing. But, I don't think he's like a super raw just speed guy like all these other guys that tested really well for the 40-yard dash at the combine. But he's not great versus press and at the line of scrimmage, and he does have limited usages. He's not great at press on the line of scrimmage, and his usage is definitely limited in terms of what you can use him as. He's kind of very good for obviously screens and obviously deep throws, but with Michael Pittman being your bigger wide receiver and Josh Downs being in the slot, Xavier Worthy has played outside a good amount. He kind of played over half his snaps outside. He can play outside and be kind of your super speedy outside number 2. So I think even just fit, I think this works pretty well as well. He's 6'1", so yeah, he can definitely play outside. Then we have 47 with the New York Giants. We're going to go Tyler Nubin out of Minnesota. They lost Xavier McKinney. He's the best safety in the class. Just pure safety. I think if you, again, want to put Cooper DeJean at safety, obviously way better. But definitely just the best, like, hey, he's 100% a safety in the class. Very good in coverage, very good athlete. He could honestly go a little bit higher, but safeties aren't valued as much. I kind of like this. Xavier McKinney replacement. Pretty easy there. Jacksonville Jaguars at 48. We are going to go with an edge rusher, and we're going to go with Adisa Isaac out of Penn State. Now, he's not really this like insane, super high like ceiling guy, kind of like his buddy Chop Robinson, but he's a very high floor player. And I think for the Jags, when you look at their edge rushers, they obviously paid Josh Allen, but it's Josh Allen, and then you obviously have Trayvon Walker, who you drafted first overall, but that's it. And you got to really rely on Walker, hopefully taking another big step up next year. So I think it'd be smart to get a guy who can come in and like is going to just be a good player, and they're not going to really have any sort of like potential bust. Like maybe, I'm not saying it will, but maybe with Trayvon Walker. But he can come in and play rotational, and he's good versus the run and pass. And kind of the pass rushers they have now are more so like purely pass guys. They're not really run stuffers. So getting at least someone who can actually stop the run on the outside, I think would be pretty helpful for them. Again, high floor, not a ton upside, but he's a very good run defender, and I think he's just going to be a pretty solid, consistent rotational player. He's definitely going to play a ton from his rookie year to the end of his career, and Jags need kind of a player like that. 49, the Denver Broncos. We are going to have them go Zach Frazier out of West Virginia. they need a safety, obviously, after losing Lloyd Cushenberry. And this is just like a solid second-round center. Consistent, solid athlete, solid production, high floor, day 2 center. Pretty perfect. The Packers, after trading down at 50, or did they trade down at 50? No, they had a different second-round pick, I think. This is one of the picks maybe they had gotten. I can't remember which trade potentially. It doesn't matter. But they had traded down previously. Well, we're going to do it again because they are really upset that they lost all of their picks in that one move-up trade. So there's a team that, again, the player they really need, the positions they need, I think can go later. So I think it wouldn't be shocking to see them be like, okay, let's be aggressive and get this one guy that like is exactly what we need, another corner and a safety, and then just like wait and trade back for the other potential players that we need. But we're going to have a team trade up that I think a player slightly falling that they would need, and that is the Baltimore Ravens. We're going to have them obviously trade up to number 50, and they will probably give up just their third-round pick this year, 93. It's a later third, and this kind of just feels like, maybe I could give up a few other stuff, but it says it'd like to be accepted. Normally you have like extra percentages there, but this kind of just feels like the perfect value for it. So we'll go ahead and do that trade, and we're going to have them be taking Kingsley Suamataia out of BYU with the Baltimore Ravens. It's again a hard pick for Green Bay, so I think this fits more for them to trade down, but just for the Ravens in general, I think they should go up and snag a very high upside developmental tackle. Ronnie Stanley is on a 1-year deal. Patrick McCarry is also on a 1-year deal, and he's played all of the offensive line positions. And Kingsley is a player that some people really like and could go in like the 40s range. So with him falling a little bit, I think it's very good. He's an insane athlete. Obviously, BYU isn't the greatest, just competition, but I think this kind of feels like a player that would be, some sort of offensive line on the Ravens. Like, I think this fits pretty well. And their offensive line you would think is fine, but the tackles are low key. They could both be gone in 1 year, and Ronnie Stanley's older, so I think prioritizing potential tackle in the second round would be a pretty good idea. Then we have 51 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They need to get a receiver after losing Deontay Johnson, and we're going to fill that role pretty perfectly, at least I think, and go ahead and get Roman Wilson. He's just another good, solid wide receiver too. I think he's pretty underrated in this class. I think, he was kind of underrated from being in a heavy, a run-heavy Michigan offense. He's very reliable, only a 2% drop rate, very good route runner. I think he'll be a very good complement to other, downfield players like Pickens, who's kind of their main receiver right now. He can play on the outside or in the slot. And right now they have like Van Jefferson as one of their starting receivers, or Quez Watkins. No, not good. They will take receiver in the first 2 picks. And if it's not the first one, which I don't think they need to because the receivers can fall and they're very deep, I think this would be a pretty good pick for the Steelers here. 52 for the Rams. We are going to have them go with one of the more, again, I also think underrated edge rushers who a lot of people aren't talking about, and that's Jonah Ellis out of Utah. He is, more of like a just pure pass rusher. I think he can stop the run, but the Rams, I know we took defensive line for them earlier, but they just need more sack production. They lost a ton of it, and I think a lot of their young players who, were looking really good, I think they benefited from having Aaron Donald getting like triple and double teams. So I think you do need to make up for that big loss, because it's a gigantic loss, with getting 2 more stud pass rushers to even it out to where everyone has one-on-ones, no double teams, and they all have equal opportunity to go and just wreak havoc. Jonah Ellis, I think right now they also have like Michael Hochit or whatever as one of their edge rushers, which is not a good starter. He's got to be a rotational guy. So I think this also works out well. But he's a very technically refined pass rusher for only being 21 years old. He was injured near the end of the year, so that's why he wasn't that's why he's not being talked about as much, and his stock has just been falling, but it's not really based on his play, just based on a minor injury that happened. And he is only 6'2", I think 250. Again, not great versus the run, but phenomenal pass rusher. His tape was very good. And I do kind of like this fit with the Rams here. 53, the Eagles. They have a lot of picks in this class. Obviously Howie Roseman doing his crazy trades. But we are going to have them go a player that I love in this class. I think this would be a super, super, super fun pick. And that is going to end up being a wide receiver. And it's none of them that are shown here. Not a single one. It's Malachi Corley out of Western Kentucky. I think he's definitely worth being taken here. Again, the receiver class is insane. Maybe you want to take him lower in the second. I don't really think it matters because any other team could like him and take him higher. I just love this player. I just love him. He's obviously, or just for the Eagles in general, I think they're very thin out of their second wide receiver. They have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, and then it's like Devontae Parker outside of that. And with the Eagles already having addressed a few of their needs earlier on, I think go ahead and get this guy who would fit perfectly in the slot and is almost like a Debo light. He's like Debo Samuel, like just light. Like he needs to be used as such, obviously, but he has so much potential. He's played cornerback and halfback before, and it really looks like it. He's a yards after catch monster. I think he'd be just so fun for this Eagles offense in the slot. And just looking at their draft, they get Kamari Lassiter. They help their secondary. They go out and they get Graham Barton to really solidify the offensive line back to what it already was in terms of them losing obviously one of the best run blockers and just blockers ever in Jason Kelce. And you could go linebacker here, but some of the linebackers do go off the board. And I think the only one that I would consider would be Junior Colson, but he doesn't really fit what they need right now. And I think if a linebacker falls, they could take one. One that I also really like that for some reason is lower on this board is like Cedric Gray. I think is pretty solid. Michael Barrett's also pretty good as well. But it's really like the top three guys. Junior Colson's in that range as well. But I think Corley would just be awesome. I would just totally love him in this Eagles offense. So he's going to go there. And then, like I said, we just talked about it. This fits perfectly with what they need. The Browns, they need a linebacker to just solidify their entire offense, or not offense, to solidify their defense in terms of getting all the positions figured out. And that's Junior Colson. They need a Mike linebacker to really complete that starting lineup. They don't really have like a full-time, like just big middle linebacker. And that is Junior Colson. He's young. He's nothing crazy as an athlete, but he does a great job filling the gaps in the run. He's a traditional Mike, and that's literally what the Browns need. This is a perfect fit. So works out pretty well for the Browns there if the Eagles do not end up taking a linebacker, which I don't think they could take Junior Colson, but maybe if Cooper falls, they could take him as well. Or if somehow Peyton Wilson falls there, obviously they would want him as well. Then we're going to go with the Dolphins. Could have gone in other different positions, but we're going to go Jatavian Sanders out of Texas. Right now it's kind of Jonnu Smith, and that's it. Jonnu Smith is definitely more of a backup. In terms of just other positions, I think defensive line could also be there. It could be Ruka Rororo. Maybe if you want another defensive interior, Brandon Dorlus, Devondre Sweat, but Devondre Sweat is not going in the second round. Just look it up, and you'll find out why. But, again, they don't really have a starting tight end there. Sanders is a very good weapon, kind of going underrated with the tight end class and Brock Bowers kind of being the talk of the town. He's a very good athlete. Didn't drop, I don't think, a pass this past year. He's a very vertical wide receiver, good in contested catch. He's kind of just a giant receiver, not really a blocker, has a ton of potential. I like this. It just fits. Dallas Cowboys at 56. We're going to end up going receiver here. Receiver class is great, and I think they still need one. And we're going to go Xavier Legette out of South Carolina. Now, it may be a little bit of a shocking pick for some people, but I do think it makes sense. The defense is honestly good, at least in terms of prioritizing it in the first two rounds. So I think they could go ahead and get offense, and they would get probably a receiver that, I think a guy that would kind of impact the team sooner rather than later. In terms of like, hey, we got this quarterback we're paying a lot of money to. we need to just get like better players on the field right now. Jalen Tolbert, I think, is one of their starting receivers right now, which I don't love. And Brandon Cooks is definitely old. Now with Xavier Legette, he did disappoint a little bit at the Senior Bowl, but he's still a monster, and he has a ton of potential as an athlete. Big X receiver. He's a little bit older. His route tree is limited, but his catch radius is gigantic. He only dropped 2 passes out of 73 catches last year. Has, again, a slight boomer bust potential as well. But we'll go him for the Dallas Cowboys to pair alongside CeeDee Lamb. 57, the Buccaneers. This could be running back, but I'm not going to go running back. I'm going to end up going on the interior because they just need an interior guy here. We're going to go Christian Hayes out of Connecticut. Again, they need help at guard. They just do, and he's experienced, balanced, good athlete, fast for his size, good on the move, just works. Seattle, 58. We are also going to end up going offensive lineman, and we're going to go again, kind of hard name to say. I think I looked it up. Amagadije. I butchered that probably. But don't think just because you can't pronounce his name that he's not very good. Obviously, Giannis Antetokounmpo, when he was coming out, people didn't know how to pronounce his name, and they didn't really pay attention. This guy has a lot of potential, kind of similar to the BYU tackle that we ended up taking earlier in Suamatia. Again, very high potential, great athlete. He's played both guard and tackle, so he can play guard. I know they do need guard help as well. His body is just like purely built for the NFL. He's falling, I think, because he only played 4 games last year, and it is Yale, so you don't really see hardly any offensive tackles out of the Ivy League, let alone Yale. But he was pretty phenomenal when he played. So he dominated like you want a player to do at the lower level, and will obviously need to get used to a lot of stuff. But this also kind of feels like a Seahawks just player that they would take as well. Houston Texans at 59. We're going to go the defensive interior. They signed a lot of guys, but I do think they need help. And we're going to go Chris Jenkins out of Michigan. Again, need interior help, especially versus the run, and that's what Chris Jenkins is going to be there to do, just stuff the run. He's very strong, very good run defender in a 4-3, which is what they run. Good fit. I like it. The last 5 picks here. The Buffalo Bills at 60. We're going to have them go Javon Bullard out of Georgia. They did lose, obviously, both of their big name safeties just this past offseason, so they do need safety help. He's great in coverage, more of a coverage defender. He can also play in the slot and at safety. He's not afraid to tackle, sometimes to his detriment, kind of, just almost like a hit stick in Madden, like flits the hit stick and the guy goes flying, and sometimes that's what he does, so he might end up missing a tackle or two, so he'll need to fix that. But I think he's got a ton of potential as a safety. He's one of the sneaky safety prospects that not a lot of people are talking about. He's got a good amount of potential. Then we have 61 with the Detroit Lions. I'm going to go ahead and go edge rusher, and I'm going to go Marshawn Kneeland out of Western Michigan. I do really, really like this player. They signed Marcus Davenport, but he's not really reliable. He's been hurt a lot. Kneeland is a big, balanced edge rusher, very good size, is a good athlete, kind of a pretty good edge number 2, especially alongside Aiden Hutchinson, who I definitely think needs some help. It can't just be all him. He's super tough and competitive and just totally seems like a player that would be in just on a Dan Campbell team and just on the Lions. Keep him in the state of Michigan. I love the fit there. Then the last 3 picks, the Green Bay Packers, they finally do get to pick, and I think they still take a player that they could potentially need, and I think is rated higher, in my opinion, definitely than what it says here. Is worth taking in the late 2nd round, and that's Dominic Puny out of Kansas. He's probably going to play tackle, but they do like getting these guard/tackle players. They already have Elton Jenkins who can move around, and I think that's a pretty valuable trait for them that they appreciate. And I think definitely Puny is going to – he's had both tackle and guard experience. He's probably more so going to be a guard than a tackle, but they do have 2 tackles already. They haven't signed him yet because they were younger, but I think they will in the future. And with them needing interior help, they could still fix it after trading down a ton. So I think the Packers had a pretty good draft here as well. They don't get a ton of players, but they moved up for a guy they would not have gotten at all, and that helps them right now. And they still get more of a Puny's more of a need, not really like a developmental guy, but he's also, I think, an underrated, like, hey, I can play and start right now. He's got great power. He's a very good pass blocker at guard, and I think a team who's going to scheme him up on the offensive line, like with them moving a ton. He's a very good zone blocker. He's very athletic, which the Packers obviously like to do, move their swing guards a ton. This kind of fits perfectly with what they want to end up doing. There's also an interior offensive lineman who's lower, I don't know why, but is definitely maybe worth taking the second round. That's Cooper Beebe. Very, very underrated, very good. He might be one of my favorite just like value picks. Like if he's going in the 120s, which he won't, but even just the third round, I think that's a pretty awesome pick. But we'll go Puny for the Packers at 63. With the 49ers having some sort of potential issues at receiver. Don't know what's going on with Brandon Ayuk. We're gonna go receiver that a lot of people there aren't really a lot of people that have him like super low, but I've seen some people have this player like in their top 6 wide receivers, and that's Jalen Polk out of Washington. I still think they could afford to take just another weapon in general. It seems like they don't want to pay Ayuk, and they have Jennings, but Jennings, he's obviously had a great Super Bowl, was very good, but he's not going to be some sort of Ayuk type player. But Polk is kind of your ideal wide receiver too. He's got good hands, he's good size, he's a very good deep ball wide receiver, just a good wide receiver too. I think that's what they could use if something goes wrong with Ayuk, but he could even produce right now if they could switch out him and Jennings. And obviously Debo has had injury issues as well, and they could use an actual outside receiver because Debo again is kind of like in the slot moving around all the time. Debo's kind of just like a weapon. Polk is more of like a good receiver. Then with the last pick at 64, the Chiefs, they traded up earlier, and I'm going to have them trade back to end off the draft, and we're going to have a team trade up for a player that I think is worth taking in this spot, and a team that had a ton of picks in this round, and they're pretty close to the second round, or pretty close to the third round, and that is going to be the Commanders. I'm going to have them trade up from 67 to 64. They could also give up like 152 and go down and maybe get like a 6th or a 7th round pick next year or something like that. And we go ahead and offer this trade, and they are going to end up trading up for a corner that is ranked lower, but I definitely think is worth taking in this spot, and that's Max Melton out of Rutgers. I think Max is a second round caliber corner, and Washington definitely needs corner. I think they have like Benjamin St-Juste and the corner that they took in the first round last year. I'm forgetting his name. I cannot remember his name. Emmanuel Forbes. I'm going to leave all that in. I'm not going to cut it out. Emmanuel Forbes, who they took. I did not love that pick at the time, and that might end up being true. But Max is a great athlete. Very good length. He's not a great run defender. He's okay, but he's got good hands, major experience, which I think Washington lacks in their secondary. Now, there were a few players that did not end up getting picked. Obviously, that's going to happen in every single draft that you thought would have gone higher, but one of them that I want to address, at least 2 of them that were ranked high. Like, why did you not have these guys going in the, second round? One of them is edge rusher Chris Braswell, who was kind of at the top of PFF's board like a ton. And Chris Braswell is interesting because normally a lot of Bama players are just like really refined and stuff like that. He's not very refined, and he's like not an insane athlete either. He's like solid versus the pass, but he's not a great run defender. I think he's a little bit overrated. I think he's just getting rated high because he went to Bama. So I'm not as big of a fan on his. And Jermaine Burton is just weird because he would definitely have been picked in the second round, but there were a ton of just like character concerns with him, and he apparently had a lot of issues while at Bama. You can obviously look up some of the just antics that he did, and I think it's going to push him out of the second round. And I want to be relatively realistic, and players that just like Devondre Sweat. Like with his issues, he's probably not going to be taken now in the second round. So that's why some of those guys fell. But we'll have another mock draft out, obviously, when the draft is actually going to lead up, and that's going to be more like predictive. This is what I think these teams will do based on all this and that. But we'll have like some more stuff out, kind of going over some of my favorite players. And one thing I normally do is take, kind of some people's favorite teams and do like just a draft of theirs. So there might be an episode where I go through and just say, hey, can you draft for the Giants for me? And I just do a full Giants draft and show you what they could get and what I think they should do. So if you want me to do that for your favorite team, leave them in the comments and I will add them to the list. A lot of times I just do it for people who ask. So I'll do my favorite team, obviously, and then I'll do some of my friends' favorite teams. But I'd love to get the viewers involved as well. So for that potential episode, if you have your favorite team and you want me to do a full mock for them, and it's going to be realistic. I think a lot of issues that some people do or have is like ones that like channels that just specifically do it for their favorite teams. Sometimes they're just not realistic at all. Trust me, this one's going to be pretty realistic for who's going to be available. So if you want me to do your favorite team there, put them in the comments. But this is the mock. This is what it looks like for the first round. You can pause, see whoever your teams picked. That is the first round. And then here's the second round. You can also go ahead and pause the second round at any time to see what your team picked. But that is going to do it for me. Again, if you enjoyed, leave a like, share, comment. I'm going to try and keep growing. I love doing a lot of this YouTube stuff. So if you enjoyed, please go ahead and leave a like, comment, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Also, you can go ahead and check me out, Mathis NFL. I've done a good amount of videos with my friend over there on his channel, so go ahead and check that out as well. And that is going to do it for me. So, as always, stay smart, stay sharp, and I will see you guys later. Peace.